you. Hi, I'm Rich Johnston. This is Kieron Gillen, and we're currently at the Portrait Gallery restaurant. Kieron's on the wine, I'm about to be on the cheese, and we're here to talk about Pete Cannon, Thunderbolt, your latest...
Peter Cannon.
Peter Cannon. I call him Pete, my friend!
You don't know Peter Cannon, Thunderbolt well enough to call him Pete.
Look, we go back a long time. So at least probably sometime in the mid-90s when I first, or late 80s when I first came across Mike Collins' first of him, and then I wanted to find out a little bit more, and then I kind of stopped trying to find any more. So this is me returning, I guess.
Yes.
So Peter Cannon, right through you. You thankfully let me see the first 7 pages, so I'm up for that, in black and white, at the start, and it's, it all looks very intriguing. Now, why? Is this purely they called you up and you thought, why not? Or is it something you've had in your head for a while?
Well, I never think about anything which I don't own unless someone pays me. It's that kind of, deliberately, that kind of, I refuse to think about any corporate properties. It's almost like scab labour, I find. So I don't think about anything I don't own. But like Nicky, I love doing the James Bond comic, and he was like, you should do something else. And he mentioned a bunch of like things they had he'd be interested in working with. And sort of like Thunderbolt. And I go, what about Thunderbolt? That's interesting.
Why?
It was one of those kind of like, because, how to phrase this? I've been away from, the actual appeal is, I've been away from superhero comics for quite a while now. Like, I haven't done anything since Angela for Marvel. Like, I've been doing at least, how many years of Star Wars have I done now? Several.
Which is superhero-ish.
Uber's superhero.
Uber's, of course.
How to phrase this? Leaving cool readers will not count any of those books that we've just said as superhero comics. What they mean is, we know what we mean by superhero comic.
We know it when you look at it.
Yes, exactly. So I would never deny the notes of superhero in all the stuff I do, but in terms of what the conversation of what explicitly the conversation about what a superhero comic is, I have not been part of that conversation for a while, and that kind of like, and the reason I stopped that because I was aware that I was burnt out, or rather I was about to be burnt out. In that kind of, I could sense a strain, and the second I started doing Star Wars stuff and how much easier I found that, it made me realize, oh no, I'm tired. I need to stop this before I become crap.
So did Angela hurt you?
No, Angela was it was hard to write. As in, like, I was aware that I was having to force myself quite hard to do it. And you know, I'm absolutely fine with the work. I was aware that it's that kind of, you know, you're going to burn out, rather than I've been quite lucky to realise when I'm going to burn out and then immediately retract. And this is kind of partially, I feel I've been getting urges to write and play in the genre again. And this is quite a, and also I wanted a safe place to sort of like do it without any of the rigmarole of the big two universes. Like, I don't need to, you know, by definition, Thunderbolt, me and Casper have created our entire universe around Peter Cannon. Okay. And so we get an event-style story, and we get to do all the stuff we love about superhero comics, but without having to worry if, I don't know, Brian Bendis is going to do a crossover and take over my characters. You know, which is all part of the fun of doing them RP too. But the idea that we can do it in a very safe place, and play with it, and have a good time, and use that kind of petri dish to explore what we think we can do with superheroes.
I did like that. I felt like I was stepping into something that had already been around for a while, like, as if you had previous tales. We start with quite a wide cast for a solo book kicking off, with a few little things thrown in. How many of them are originals? How many of them have you?
They're all original. Okay. I mean, how to phrase original is like, you know, it's superhero comics. Define original. It's like maybe there was one original superhero, and that was Superman, and the rest have been kind of derivative. You could argue. I wouldn't. Unless you've got, you know, 2 more drinks down the line, you might get me to argue. In actual fact,
it was just that it started with. Well,
no. The point being is, we wanted here's a universe.
Yes.
And the idea, like, Peter Cannon is the way we especially built Peter Cannon. As I went back and I looked at the '60s comics, I looked at the Mike Collins '90s stuff, I looked at like the Dynamite previous series. And the interesting about Peter Cannon is how small the canon is. Pun intended, I guess.
Of course.
I've got to admit it's a pun now.
Yeah.
You know. And he's also a character who is this very small body of work, but of course he carries this weird, enormous footprint by inspiring one of the most influential supervillains of all time.
Yes.
You know, and like, you can't...
And he's a supervillain for you.
Oh no, without a doubt. How to phrase this? Watchmen... You know, Watchmen is a more complicated work than that. I was talking about this recently about all those characters are babby, and they're not. I don't really mean that. Shorthand. They are, you know, they're antagonists.
Yes.
By definition, Ozymandias is an antagonist. We'll give him that. And an antagonist in the genre of superhero comics has a name, and it's Superman.
Yes,
that's all I mean by that. So the idea of Peter Cannon having this relatively small body of work, also a very long shadow, and of course, I find really interesting the fact that, of course, he's creator owned.
Of course, yes.
And the fact that, Peter Cannon...
For so long as well. I mean...
Like, there's not many 1960s superheroes who are owned by the estate.
Really not.
And the idea... And, of course, you compare and contrast that with what happened to Ozymandias.
Yes,
Is,
of course.
Those kind of ideas. And if I'm going to do something which is basically my take on superhero comics, and what I think is working, what I think isn't working, that's an interesting character to use as a filter.
Yeah.
So, but at the same time, the way we've taken him is really abrasive.
I mean, certainly from those first few pages, quite psychotic, sociopathic, or at least detached.
Yes,
very
detached.
strong idea, which wasn't. I mean, there was an aspect of the original which was, I'm different from humanity, I've trained myself. It's quite fascistic, I guess, and they're kind of like self-internalizing, and separate from humanity, you are now lesser beings to me. There was never really played on much. It was picked up on quite a bit, I would say, in Watchmen, but it seems to be the focus.
It's tricky. Like, I think if you actually go back and read the 1960s Pete Rossi's comics, the most striking element to that for me is how utterly reluctant Peter Cannon is to get involved. Every single story is basically, Taboo says, you should go and do something. He goes, no, humanity is stupid. Because he's been raised in genuinely a more enlightened society than his. The idea that he looks down on, it's not just him being better, he generally thinks the way our world works is dumb.
Yeah.
And that kind of...
I mean, that ties into other bit of told back. I mean, you think about things like Tarzan, you think about Sherlock even, that are a certain way of seeing the world.
That is definitely the way I let Sherlock is a character I use repeatedly as a reference to Cannon. But the story structure is like he doesn't want to be Thunderbolt. Peter Cannon and Taboo, pretty much every episode he goes, you need to be Thunderbolt. No, I want to be Peter Cannon. I'm going to play squash. And I got the idea of like Peter Cannon as this phenomenally reluctant hero, and I've ended up like imagining him and like aging about 20 years.
Yeah.
And like the idea of like this is kind of his Dark Knight Returns, I guess.
Okay.
That's not really a comparison.
It sounds like a good headline for me, though, doesn't it?
It does a bit, but the idea that it's not that I'm going, because no one knows how to phrase this. Most of your readers or watchers in this particular case only know Peter Cannon. If I say like 99% of them will go, tell me something about Peter Cannon, and they'll go, inspiration for Ozymandias.
It's true.
And that's the only thing they'll know.
It's well, I would have gone. Yeah.
And that's okay, because that's gives you an enormous width and breadth there. So the idea of actually taking this character and getting an implied history, and his implied history is born of everything I read in all the other runs, and I've sort of combined them a bit. Like, that's my imagined backstory for this Peter Cannon, is like all the previous bits of canon merged into one area, and this gives us an implied universe. So, and since we're playing Peter Cannon as acerbic as we are, Taboo pretty much exists to humanise him. Taboo is like, genuinely his really good friend and companion, and that's the bit where you get to see a bit more human side of him, and Taboo is always trying to urge him to be more kinder. Yeah. And we bring in these other much more traditional superhero characters. The archetype, but these are characters who are based upon, apart from between analogue and archetype, as in there's a couple of archetypal references in each of them. But they allow us to basically present him into a traditional superhero universe.
Right.
And then compare and contrast him with them. And then there's like, I only wrote this in my notepad last night, there was a kind of like, you remember that Warren Ellis, you're Warren Ellis Ford graduate as well.
Yeah, I certainly am, yes.
And like, we kind of looked down at the superhero genre a bit.
You did?
I did it.
You really did?
But the cool effort, and I performancely did it. But the idea of the kind of like, the slight distaste for the form was actually, I clearly love it as well.
Yeah.
I'm not like.
Warren doesn't.
Yeah, Warren doesn't. There's definitely British creators of my generation who don't like superheroes. And for me, they're kind of like my distaste how the industry has treated people, and how the all the bad things about superhero comics leads me to kind of have a strained relationship with the genre. And in some way, Peter Cannon has got that. That's the bit where I've dug into it for me, in terms of like Peter Cannon's. I mean, let's be honest, it's not spoiling. Peter Cannon will get dragged more into the world. And that's like one of the things, like, in some ways, on the personal level, it's about me falling back in love with superhero comics, whilst also doing a really hard critique about everything they're doing wrong. And when, of course, without phrases, I really, how to say, a comic I don't like very much. And I have problems of, that's not true, I like it in Oswald. I have problems of Kingdom Come.
Yeah.
I find, like, didactic comics, and a lot of my books are actually the young as good as the old. and I dislike the idea that Superman is the most powerful superhero because there's this kind of weird boomer-esque logic to it, and that kind of stuff is really hardwired into the meta structure. So, whilst not wanting to actually do It Was Better in the Old Days, they're kind of like Peter Cannon is kind of like exciting. It's clearly a book that's driven by rage, but it's laughing. You will laugh all the way through Peter. There will be bits where people go, there'll be sky punching, Mark Miller-esque exciting moments of action and genuine humour. It's like the closest thing I've done to Young Avengers in some ways, in terms of being formally brave and attacking the genre, but it lacks any of the kind of it's not a team book in any way either. So
This begins looking as if that's where we're going.
Oh yeah. It's like it plays like the first issue. I would say the major influence on the first issue is there's a lot of authority in there. This is basically me going back.
Is it authority or authority? What would you say?
I would say the Elliotian authority.
Okay.
Like and that kind of like turn of the millennium. The idea of, basically where the modern superhero comic came from. My read of superhero comics of post-Authority is the Authority invented, or actually the Authority popularised both the widescreen book and everyone says, but it also popularised basically a paramilitary super team. And since then, coming through the Ultimates, made the idea that most super teams become military organisations. Even the X-Men became essentially a terrorist cell.
Yes.
And this was carried all the way through. And there's been in the 2010s, there's been more revival of kind of more like ground level team. But the idea of the alter ego disappeared in many ways. And it became basically superhero comics became procedurals.
Yes.
As it became the idea of like superheroes was a job, and we saw this is why one reason why Captain Marvel fit very well into all this. Captain Marvel being the ultimate military Marvel hero. Anyway, I'm talking.
Well, why didn't go down as well?
She exists and she's going to get a movie.
She is indeed. Yes.
Like this, if you're talking about the tonal period, so that's kind of where I start, and we end up going. Each issue moves through these modes and things I learn. Pastiche would imply that I'm mocking it. Satire would imply satire definitely would. And maybe pastiche, but the idea of I am touching these notes and they are okay. How do these things make sense together? And there's like in some way, in the same way Peter Cannon. At least the way I kind of define Peter Cannon is he sees more than most people.
I noticed that, yes, that seems to be his thing.
That's the kind of the idea.
That's the way you look at the other 9% of your brain, 10% of your brain kind of thing. Here's just about perception.
Yeah, the idea of like if you see more, you can do more. As in you see more, you can understand more. And that's kind of the idea of enlightenment.
Am I getting just putting a mental image of Doctor Who and the 11th Doctor?
A bit, I guess. I mean, like
looking around and just seeing something, noticing something.
It's a Sherlock. I mean, later on, basically.
It's also Sherlock, of course. Yeah. The same, like doing both shows. Yeah.
These are all kind of like ideas, and the idea how you could do a different kind of super suit. I mean, I have a kind of it's one of my things I hate about actually genuinely I dislike about the Marvel Universe, the list of who is smartest. That's not how intelligence works. Intelligence isn't like it's not like how much weight you can lift, and even like weightlifters do well in different events.
You've got to put up the trading card. It's got on the trading card, so you can see it's on the stats. This is on the ultimate whatever it is, the official guide to Marvel Universe. You look at the stats.
So I don't even like it.
Top trunks.
I know exactly why they do it, but it's nonsense. It's not how.
We have some cheese. Thank you.
That's the thing that bugs me because that's just not how. Even like how to phrase this. Even strength. I mean, people ask who's stronger, Hulk or Thor. But it's like if you look at a weightlifter, weightlifters do well in different events. If you watch the World's Strongest Men competitions, you get like some guys amazing in some events and awful in others, and you get an average of one person is strongest. But it's still kind of like that kind of thinking. I was trying to I conceived Hulk and Thor when I was writing them as strong in different ways.
Yeah.
But I think I always thought about Thor as strong as he needs to be. That was all my kind of way of thinking about them as in, Thor can wrestle an alligator and still be a fight, but he'll beat the alligator. As opposed to, but he can also wrestle the sun. As in, narratively speaking, he is as strong as is required. That's a good way to be strong.
I mean, it's handy being a god.
Exactly.
That fits the narrative. It's not.
Conversely,
there's no specific strength level. It's god.
Conversely, the Hulk is strong like science. For me, it's like the Hulk is. Hulk is a physical reality.
You said it, Steve, but as you well know, the angrier you get, the stronger he gets. There's always strength +1.
Oh no, that's what I meant.
But turn up to 11.
There is a physiological kind of like part of it, and so Hulk's strength feels more corporeal to me.
Oh God!
You know what I mean? Like,
you know what we're doing, Kieron? We're sat in the Portrait Gallery restaurant talking about who's stronger, Hulk or Thor.
I think they're strong and interesting. That's what I'm trying to say. Is I'm much more interested in like super strength should be, everyone's super strength should feel individual. So like I'm coming back to Peter Cannon, like I'm trying to make way his super intelligence feels different.
Okay.
That's the kind of there's a texture how he thinks and looks at the world that I would like to come across in the comic, as opposed to just making him a genuine super genius.
Now, is there a specific way you're going to be using the medium to do that?
All the time. I mean, like,
is there anything? Are you going to break panels? Are you going to break structure in order to get that kind of thing?
I'll tell you what. There's a lot of me and Casper. Basically, it's probably a good time to talk about Casper. Like, I was hanging outside the London Con.
Right.
London Super Comic Con, and I was like, "What are you doing next, Casper?" Because he was angelic, and I presumed he was like tied on, and he was doing an Afro issue, and I was like, I think a Ghost Rider issue. And what are you doing next? Oh, I haven't got any plans yet. And I was like, oh, that's interesting. So like, because I know I've loved Casper's work, and he's interesting, and he's adaptable, and he's ambitious, because he works in all these different styles.
This is what you do. You stalk Comic Cons looking for future projects.
So I just started sort of casually talking about this. Oh, it's all going to be 9-panel grids, but we're going to be doing this clever stuff with it, and like, so I'm just talking casually, not saying, do you want to do it, Casper? But just like sitting at the bar, flirting.
You absolutely are.
Yeah.
That is.
And he said,
and
that's how he lured them into it. And that is. So he was. This is such a formally deliberate book that I had to basically talk to the artists to make sure they knew what they were getting into.
Right.
Like, it is fundamentally about the 9-panel grid in many ways. Like,
well, I mean, many of your things. I mean, it is now back in vogue.
It's interesting. I've never ever written a 9-panel comic before.
Oh, you talk about it a lot.
I know. It's my motivation. It's like my first comic ever wrote was 9-panel, as in like Hits, which was like the small press thing. But I've never actually used 9-panel because I know that most artists hate it, and I've used it occasionally in a few books. And
when they hate it, is it just like
it's
restrictive?
It's both restrictive. Yeah, it's restrictive and a lot of work.
Okay.
And it's very much a good writer's medium. So it's quite interestingly in vogue, and there is an element of like, how to phrase this. I showed it to Alex Packnell about some of the first issue, and he said, occasionally it's got to be Mick Jagger who's stretched across the stage. There's a bit of swagger in things. Oh yeah, you can do this, and that kind of like that's what
the 9-panel grid gives you the opportunity to break out of that and then do that kind of stuff if you so wish.
Exactly, and it's like, but it's also about the limitations of the 9-panel grid. Yeah. So like, in some ways, I may in a real way, Peter Cannon's superpower is the 9-panel. Peter Cannon's superpower is the 9-panel grid. That's the way I almost think about it.
Okay.
And it's in some ways it becomes a deconstruction of the concept of formalism in comics. I mean, I'm not alone in this one. I mean, Fearscape, which is Ryan's doing, which is everyone please read Fearscape. It's an amazing deconstruction of the potential of writers, and very funny, very, very funny. Even occasionally feels slightly loaded.
I think it's like more by writers than non-writers.
Yes.
So yeah, that's slightly weird. But to be fair, most people in comics want to be writers. So,
okay. The writer is the job you think you can do easy. And it's like.
And there's very little to put you off from thinking you can. Because you can, and then you do, and then you read reviews, and even that isn't,
Even some people go, wait, maybe they're all wrong. My mum likes me.
Yeah, there's this idea of like imposter syndrome, and there's also the opposite of imposter syndrome, which has got a longer German name. Yes. Two people's names which I forget now. But there's very much
thingy syndrome. Thingy syndrome. I'm a serious intellectual. Anyway, back to Peter Cannon.
Okay. One thing I wanted, because you danced around all sorts of different animal books and things in relation there. The thing I got just from those 7 pages, I got an awful lot of Tom Strong, and I wonder if that was in any way there.
That's interesting. Tom Strong. I was thinking about the ABC books quite recently. Not actually before I was doing work on Thunderbolt, but I found myself rereading some of them.
Yeah.
And I remember him saying after Watchmen, he wanted to, he came out superhero, and he said, and I'm paraphrasing quite badly, so I want to do action comics for like intelligent teenagers, right? Intelligent 12, 13-year-olds. And the idea that, and going back to those books, I remember some people being quite disappointed in them because they're not Watchmen. But like, there is a playful intelligence to them, and there's some real and that's kind of like, especially in the first issue when we're doing the big over-the-top superhero battle, but very formally rigorous and using the grid in hopefully interesting ways. Actually, we don't use the grid in interesting ways, though. We use the grid in fluid and articulate and cool ways. As in, opposed to like issue 2 when we use the grid in granky ways. Issue 1 is much more. It's apart from the flourishes. It's really a very clean and beautiful superhero comic which Casper's killing on. But it has got that kind of mode, as in the characters are not, in the first issue, they're not written in a realistic voice. You know, they're written, like, the other characters are quite broad. I mean, partially because they're new characters, you need to introduce them quite quickly. But they're like, they're slightly stylised. And like Peter Cannon carries a bit more weight, because everyone else around him is a little bit more stylised. As if Peter Cannon's a bit more real than they are.
Yeah.
Because he sees more. There's a kind of like, he is literally a more complicated character. So there's a lot in that, and because we had such fun making up the supporting cast as well, so they do have a bit of that kind of the Tom Strong playfulness, I guess. And as you say, Tom Strong is, you know, Alan and Chris trying to find a way to make the science, you know, the poor hero less problematic, I guess, but while still keeping what makes them appealing. Yeah.
Now, I will want to ask about how you're going to launch this one, because I mean, you've got quite a strong fan base, but there's a fan base that knows where to find you and has difficulty sometimes going where it doesn't think you belong. I mean, especially also when it comes to comic book retailers, they know how to order a Marvel book by you. They've now learned, I think, how to order an Image comic book from you.
Let's hope so.
Just about, you know. It's not quite caught up with the Comixology buyers, but you know, there's definitely an idea. But things like an Avatar book, a Dynamite book, they don't seem to have that grasp as strongly.
How to phrase it?
Why?
I'm not sure. Like marketing, especially work for hire books. That's something that I like to think about. And in some ways, there's at least the fact that this. I mean, I haven't really done anything to Dynamite after the James Bond book. And this is. So this is going to be one of the most beautiful books that Dynamite have put out for quite a while. I think it's like see the pages Mary's been doing, as in when the coloured pages are coming in. Mary is somebody, she does webcomics primarily and like cyberpunk stuff. And Casper approached her saying, "Are you interested in colouring?" And she's actually in the stage, "Oh no, I want to start experimenting." So she's somebody who hasn't worked on someone else's pages before, and what she's doing is like beautiful craze neon. I mean, it feels like a really interesting vibrant. This looks like an absolute state-of-the-art superhero comic that people perhaps will go, "Oh, this is interesting." So even from the look of it, it's one of the things that, I mean, it's like, how to phrase this? Imagine if I was launching a whole new superhero universe, but not doing it in, not multiple. No, this is just, you might, you know, buy this book or buy 7 Marvel books, and you'll have as much superhero universe stuff in this one book. So it's kind of like
it's a value for money thing.
Yeah. Well, but in always the marketing is definitely something Dynamite would have to think about. I think. In actual fact, I'm just like talking about the book. I think it's genuinely exciting. So, and I also think people. Actually, I think people who pick it up first will get gloating rights. So I think a lot more people are going to pick it up the second they realise what it's doing.
Okay. I'll try to do my best to spread that word. That's probably interesting. Oh, of course, the other thing you've been living and breathing the last few days since you've had some FOC on your books. So nice late for this now is a Die.
Yes. What do you think I'm drinking? It's good.
To Die. I think,
It's good. I mean, like, I've just been launching an Image book. Of course, is different in that, you know, yes, Image do a lot of retail outreach, but also there's a lot more that you can do and would like to do. So I've written a letter to like all the retailers generally. I've written to as many retailers as I could individually. You know, I've shown like the first 3 issues to quite a lot of retailers, and like there's a lot of like reaching out to, oh, this is the book, this is what it's about, this is how I think the audience will work. So I'm in that position, which is I've not really done something that is intense since we launched Wictive. And it's like, and it's like, I haven't really launched a new concept for like that. Like after I moved on to Star Wars, I beat Darth Vader to Afra to Star Wars feels like almost like one volume. As in, like this is a body of work that flows. So I've not really launched anything new since then. If you think about it, I've several words between Peter Cannon and Die, and I've got something else I'm working on which hasn't been announced yet. It's like. There is really kind of, oh no, I'm incredibly enthused in terms of like all this being able to, this is where my head's been. The problem with like doing long-term projects, which I have been doing, is that you make the plans 5 years ago and then you're stuck to it. Or you manipulate and you play with it. But like, every time I do a Wicked issue now, I'm aware that this is something I wrote 4 to 5 years ago, and I'm doing it.
Okay.
And that kind of, I'm landing those beats, and it's incredible, and it's really powerful. Because you think, oh my god, it's working. And like when we get to the last issue, I'm not sure how it'll be emotionally powerful. But at the same time, coming and doing new stuff as well, that's new too.
No, I've just read the first issue, and the thing that strikes me, and again, you talked about what we're going in certain areas and certain places and making a generic fashion. I think there's a quote that I say about people who've gone through trauma. I think the actual reading of this is considered that it's going to be traumatic. Is this the first quote that's going to actually need a trigger warning? Because if people going in purely thinking, oh, Dungeons and Dragons, it's fine, or like goth dramaturgy, which you push the thing.
Yeah.
Some people, I think, are going to have issues.
It's tricky. I mean,
do you believe in the trigger warning for big work?
I think if something, of course I do agree with trigger warnings, but specifically it's weird, like there's nothing specifically triggering in the book, but it's clearly people dealing with strong emotions.
Stuff has happened, we don't know what stuff has happened, but people are going to transfer that to their own experiences.
Yeah.
I would say. That's the first reaction I got from that, is it didn't link, I'm not a big game, but there's certain things in my life and past that I absolutely jumped on. So like tragedies that I've lived through, and that's what I have certain levels of sensitivity. I'm not going to see this coming in a way that maybe they've been like Wicked have actually been which goes from the start.
I'm not saying that Wicked literally says everyone's going to die in the the first thing you tell people everyone's going to die.
You basically start the book with a trigger warning. I'm just saying. I'm not sure if everyone's going to. And they start Uber. Again, Nazi superheroes. You know that going in. Some people are not going to buy that comic book for a reason.
The comment
Die, I don't think has anything set up to.
It's called Die.
It is called Die. It's called Die. But again, you're playing with the punch with this as well. It's like not everyone's going to jump on that as a thing. I enjoyed it. I think some people are going to take issue with it, and I don't know. Are you going to compare anything?
How do I phrase this? I've described it as a horror book, and it's like kind of there is a degree that it's a mature rated book.
Yeah.
As I said, it's called Die. There's a variety, and in terms of actual specifics, there's all sorts of stuff in there. And this is definitely a book about looking back, and it's about a gap between a certain year and a certain period in your life and a different period in your life, and how these things refract through time and space. And the specific nature of the horror. I mean, it's like phrases.
Yeah. Okay.
What do you think it needs to?
To some degree, I would say people are aware of it. It has gained a certain. I mean, a lot of horror does. People going in, say, the most recent, say, movie, that kind of sensation thing, you have an idea of what you're going in for. You even have an age range. And you want to see it, and here we get little things that tell us. So, I would say, and also the book, God's given. I'm not a big fan of warnings anyway. I actually like the idea of people being experienced to really horrible, uncomfortable things anyway. But that's my own personal thing.
Happy with
other people, that's
I'm not sure. In the first issue, I'm not sure what trigger warning was. That's the problem. It's like it's one of those things that apart from very trigger warning trauma, you could have, but like there's nothing specific in the first issue. You're right, people will fill in whatever.
There's a lot of people sitting talking about trauma. The narrator talking about trauma, and that's, I would say, could be more impactful than actually showing. And I think a lot of what you're doing with the first issue, it seems to be you're not saying what's happened. You're allowing us to come up with our own various possibilities, and there will be hundreds, thousands of possibilities that people will come up with. And that's what I find most horrific about it. Is because if you show us that it's it's on the page. It's painting on the page. If you don't show us, you don't tell us, you just hint what it is. Well, then that's down to our minds, and so I find it.
I think it's what I'm glad you found it affecting. It's like how to phrase. There's another thing with Die is I was explicitly wanted to do a more mature comic.
Yeah.
And I could say like Wicked's rated. Wicked's the mature rated comic. But its mode is increasingly complicated, more complicated the further you go into it. I think Wicked was trying to design this actually kind of category course. Like the idea that you can start here and every year it's going to get more awkward. As in, like, and the idea of, like, ideally, like, there's definitely readers who started reading at 18, they're going to come out at 23. It's like they finished the Masters in Wicked. With Die, it's not that. Die is literally from the off.
You're putting the frog right into boiling water.
Yeah, and it's like, it's the...
But you're not actually showing the frog being boiled, but you can hear the screams.
It's kind of it's like, how to phrase this, Narnia by itself is a scary idea. The idea, like, and it's the idea of, like, weirdly, I only discovered this afterwards, there's a really interesting role-playing game whose name I currently forget. It's like a one-off Nordic-style RPG, and it's basically a therapy group. And it's basically a group of the game is played by the person who runs the game is the therapist, and everyone else in the room are people who've come back from a Narnia-esque world, and they're basically processing their trauma. And they're all talking, and it's basically an improvisational story game where people talk about things. Do you remember when this thing happened? And other people maybe remember things differently, and they work for their issues. And like, I discovered that game. Like, is it Thingy Care Boss? Care Boss? It might be one of her games. But I discovered that after I saw Cross, because I quite a lot of time. And I was like, oh no, this is coming from a similar place. And the idea that simply the whole concept of the secondary world and kids disappearing to it is something that will fuck them up for life. So it's the idea, there is the kind of, oh no, we're going to take that seriously. So in some ways, it's the deconstructionary mode of the secondary world is the thing that leads to that. The idea that, you know, I mean, like, you think about a second, I went to Narnia and a fucking witch did this to me, and now I saw the lion died, and then there was this big battle I was in, and it's like, if you actually take any of those things, even emotional, of course, Die goes dark in that, but if you take the actual things of the childhood story and actually go, sort of went through that, they're going to be a mess.
On off did you by any chance see the second season of Don't Gently?
No, I didn't.
Okay, well.
I've only recommended that.
Oh, it's very good. It's very different, totally different books, but basically, second season of Don't Gently.
Yeah.
It's a little bit like that.
No, I mean, like, yes.
There's certainly stuff in the air. When we talk about that, I mean, in fact, it's certainly Riverdale. I think we've got over the idea that Dungeons and Dragons is an actual Satanist thing that is going to turn you into occult monsters or whatever, or demonic possession. And now we get to use it as an alternate device without anyone actually taking it seriously.
What I find most interesting, I mean, obviously, I smiled when I heard that Riverdale was doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I think in some ways the fact that it's become so much more normalised and less mysterious allows you to actually even flirt with the satanic panic aspect. I mean, that's the kind of,
what I was wondering.
That is literally, I mean, like, Die's almost like, oh yeah, Jack Chick was right. And that can even talk about it, because one of the great joys of, like, geek culture, quote unquote, winning means that we can actually talk about this stuff a bit more maturely. It's part of the reason of Die is, did part of myself disappear into the fantasy world at the age of 16 and never come out? How has my love for all this stuff actually hurt me? What is it? And I don't just mean like games, I mean like fantasy and
pop culture.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I think, you know, how much has this cost me? And of course, you know, I love this stuff. At the same time, as an adult, you're allowed to have a conversation in a way we couldn't before, because the great problem with any kind of cultural situation is the fact that you fight the corner. As in, like, you can't actually have a mature conversation, because if you give an inch, those fuckers will kill you. But in this situation, when you've won, we can sort of sit back and go, wait a second.
You know what? It's one of those weird things to talk about this. I think with the passing of Stan Lee yesterday, that is a conversation that is going to be happening a lot more. If you're looking at like cultural causes, once that happens, I think do people do any self-examination? The comic book man from The Simpsons walking along the street, looking up and seeing the asteroid that hit him, or I've wasted my life. Is that a conversation that's going to be happening? I
mean, I think how to phrase this, some people run from any form of self-examination, and they will probably not enjoy dying. I mean, the male.
But if you're self-obsessed and up your own arse, you're going to kind of love it.
Yeah, but like that's the idea of any kind of. Look at me, take that seriously.
Mate, you just said Jack Chick was right. I mean, I'm putting that on the headline.
You know, exactly. I'm aware I'm feeding you once.
Feed the beast, yeah.
Maybe, I mean, there's a really good, what's the book called? I forgot it, one of the books I read for research. Basically, it was a religious book, or it's a theology examination of the Satanic Panic. And specifically about the idea that why did D&D scare religious groups so much? And of course, in some ways it actually says they were right to be scared, because D&D is actually, what D&D does in the magical circle of it is actually kind of quite close to what religion does. And they were right. And they go through all this and exploit it in different ways, and they talk about, you know, the concept of paracosm and real and not real and all this kind of stuff. So like those kind of ideas. You know, there's a lot like I had a phrase about dyers. On one level, it's about literally about these 6 people, and the idea of in the first issue you meet them when they're like 16, 15, 16, and then you meet them when they're 42, 43.
Yeah.
And then you have to immediately know who they are then, know who they are now, and so you need to see how they've changed, how they haven't changed. It's kind of like, and then the story becomes about all those conflicts. So at one level, it's this really intense personal drama about people and regrets and things they're scared of, and really big adults. I mean, I don't give an example, but I showed some scene from issue 4 to a friend of mine, and she was, "Oh, you're not joking about this being an adult book? It's literally about like a dad being afraid to do with a daughter." That kind of like, you know, really kind of like genuine like. I remember looking at Sex Criminals, and some of the issues of Sex Criminals I'm in awe of, in terms of the emotional honesty that's happening there, and Die's a bit like that. Die has a lot less filters. There's not like... Actually, Peter Cannon, the wink in Peter
Let's bring it back to where...
Yeah, yes. Peter Cannon has the wink and the playfulness and deliberately gleeful.
Yeah.
And Die isn't. Die is
I
like...
did not get much glee from this, I have to say.
Yeah, Die isn't. Die's like... It's got my... The characters are quite often... They're dialogue-y, the same way the characters tend to be. But like, this is a lot more like, oh no, I'm gonna the level of not irony as in I don't mean it, but irony is in terms of distance. The distance isn't there. You've got a narrator who's in your face, and you.
I think quite a few people are going to jump on Chuck, as in the way through.
Like Chuck, I mean, like Chuck's highly an entertaining character, but he's also obviously a prick.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, and that thing is, all these characters are bad.
You might be your only hope, though.
Yeah,
I'm saying.
I only write bad people, but they're kind of like how they're bad, and
they're all you.
No, it's always. But the always the thing for me is like these are real people in terms of like these are believable, competent human beings with faults, and they're moments when they much better than themselves, and there's moments when they let you down, and they're kind of like I'm always interested in the psychological realism no matter what the genre is.
Yeah.
Oh God, I've got lost it. I was down the track to Die. It was something else. Oh, I've lost him.
It was Peter Cannon was mentioned at some point in there, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But, that works for me.
It is odd. It's like I find it really interesting because I think Die is a book. It's one that is so open. So one side is this 6-part story. The other part is like literally the world they end up going to. This is like highly intensely like a planetary-esque examination of the entire history of the fantasy genre. Like so, in other words, the actual.
How many issues is it?
20 issues. But like, it's meant to be bigger than the pages. In the same way, like Middle Earth is bigger than the pages.
Yeah.
Like and what Stephanie's also brought to the thing. The idea this is. It's obviously a meta story to some level, but it's also.
Is it a 20-side comic?
That's a good point. Actually, we have to fold up the comic at some point. It'd be great. It's both in the meta comic, but at the same time, we have to. The same way Planetary did, because you've got to remind us why we cared about fantasy worlds in the first place. So you go. So the homages have to be so. The core of this is what was horrifying about this, and the idea of like you've got to also make it huge, which is why someone like Stephanie, this is literally being it's a comic that looks like nothing else in the stands. So when Stephanie Hansen takes you to a fantasy world, it's like no, I can see why I'd be seduced by this, and it's not something you've seen before, as opposed to homage and yeah.
I'm looking forward to the rest of what I get to read. And okay, well thanks guys. That was Kieron. This is me. This is the cheese. How's the wine?
That's good. Wine's good. I'm literally sitting here for the last half hour trying to put this cheese on this thing and not doing it yet because I don't want to eat on camera.
I'm going to leave you to. I ate on camera. I'm fine. We're going to leave you to the cheese. I'm going to enjoy some as well. Thank you very much. More of these to come. I'm hoping. And before you say this, when's Die out?
Die is out November the 5th. Sorry, December the 5th.
December 5th.
And Peter Cannon is out in January. And Wick Deer 40 is also back on December the 5th as well. So it's a big day for Kieron Gillen comics.
And coming up, we've also got a certain panel. It's a triple panel.
Oh, it's my God. I gave you a copy earlier. Yeah, 24 panels. I was lucky enough to edit an anthology of comics in aid of the PTSD trauma support of the Grenfell survivors.
Yes.
And they did an anthology of predominantly British talent, but not solely British talent. 12 of them are like curated people, professionals who selected, and the 12 are open submissions. And it's basically it's about community and hope and survival, and it's a beautiful work. I mean, Alan Moore and Melinda Gabby gave us a story for it, which is astounding, and it's a real kind of like. How to phrase it? I was very lucky to be involved in it, as I tried to turn it down because I didn't think I could do it well. Yeah. But like, I think what we've pulled together is a genuinely beautiful anthology, and hopefully we'll make a lot of money. Please buy it.
And when's that out?
That is out November the 23rd. Like, it's out in a couple of weeks.
Cool. See you then. Bye everything. Cheers.